Kell Brook versus Errol Spence. A fight that I've been massively looking forward to, and frankly, a fight that I've really struggled to make my opinions on. Top level fight, two very likeable fighters, two guys who bring very different attributes to the ring. Could be a great clash of styles and a really tough fight to call, in my opinion. Let's start with the strengths of both. Kell Brook. We know what Kell Brook is all about at this stage of his career. Classic. Good boxer, very good boxer, good feet, good hands, an excellent jab, one of the best jabs in British boxing. A real good fighter from the outside in terms of his straight jab and his long right hand. On previous videos, I've compared him to a 147-pound version of Vladimir Klitschko. Very good behind his construct, very good from range, but obviously a lot more fluid, a lot more mobile, a lot less rigid and robotic than a guy like Vladimir Klitschko. Brook's got power, he's got experience, he's been in big fights before, and he's fighting at home in what is arguably the biggest fight of his career and a defining night for him in at Bramall Lane in front of his home city of Sheffield. Errol Spence, the young upstart, huge amount of momentum, another massive guy for 147 pounds, and has cut through his opposition like a knife through butter so far. Really has looked like a bit of a wrecking ball in the division. A guy who is absolutely lethal if he's allowed to get into the pocket and to get his combinations of punches off in the pocket. A guy who is very adept at changing levels, digging to the body, going upstairs. A guy who seems naturally extremely heavy-handed and extremely athletic. Two guys who have real different attributes and are very capable behind their styles. I would give Kell Brook a slight edge, actually more than a slight edge. I would give Kell Brook a notable edge from the outside. I do believe he is the superior fighter from range and boxing behind his jab, although Errol Spence is not bad in that department whatsoever. He's an Olympian, he's a southpaw, he can box from range by all means. I also give Errol Spence an advantage on the inside and in the pocket. I think he's got next level attributes in that area. Let's talk about the weaknesses of both guys. We've talked about the strengths. Errol Spence is one of these guys who is at his best when he's allowed to close down that range and sit on your chest and get in the engine room and put punches together. I think Brook will pose a mobile target, which means he may struggle to set his feet to the same extent he's been able to in previous fights. Sometimes we've seen him set himself and then throw barrages of punches. I'm not sure that would be quite as easy against a guy like Kell Brook. I think if we talk about other weaknesses of Errol Spence, there's the potential that he may be a bit defensively open, particularly when he's moving from the outside into the inside. When he's making that transition, he starts by jabbing and then he looks to transition into the pocket. When he does that, there's the suggestion that he's quite open, that his chin's up in the air, that he's got limited head movement, and that a guy like Kell Brook will be able to time him and catch him on the way in. The level of opposition Errol Spence has been in with, he's fought decent opposition, Bundu, Algieri, those sort of guys, but they've all been known as quite light punchers, and I think there's the concern that perhaps Errol Spence has been matched against these guys who are light punchers. Maybe it's because he's got a punch distance concern. I don't know. But realistically, I think that's kind of the main area of doubt for Errol Spence. He's stepping up in level of opposition. He's stepping up against the biggest puncher he's ever faced before. And could his defence be a bit easy to crack? Could Kell Brook be able to land and time him with that backhand, right hand cross that he throws so well when Errol Spence is looking to make that transition into range? For me, that's a definite possibility. And if that were to happen, and if Kell Brook was able to start landing that right with regularity, it could put Errol Spence off his game, and it could really stop Errol Spence from getting into range and from implementing his game plan in the way that he likes to do. In terms of Kell Brook's perceived weaknesses, I've always said that the Vladimir Klitschko analogy on Kell Brook isn't just apt in terms of his pros, but potentially it's apt in terms of his cons. Kell Brook, very good behind the jab, very good behind that lead 1-2 from range. Not always the most versatile fighter. He's not as good a body puncher as Errol Spence. He's not as good on the inside at Errol Spence. And really, when fighters have been able to get on the inside of Kell Brook before. Rather than engage in a fight in the inside, he's looked to close them down. I mean, let's remember that Sean Porter fight. And we've got to admit, Sean Porter took multiple rounds off Kell Brook with his work in the pocket. And Kell Brook really looked to frustrate and hold and stifle. He didn't have the inside game himself to necessarily beat Sean Porter on the inside, more just to hold him and restrain him. A further example will be the Carson Jones fight. When Carson Jones was able to apply the pressure, Kell Brook seemed to struggle a bit and again dropped multiple rounds to Carson Jones, certainly in their first fight, if you like. So I guess that is a big perceived weakness for Kell Brook against a guy like Errol Spence. Kell's got by in his career to date by, at welterweight certainly, by holding and by frustrating, but is he going to be able to do that against a guy who applies that pressure on the inside in a much more educated way than a Sean Porter, a lot more structured and more fluid rather than just a sort of all-out brawl, if you like, of a Sean Porter. So how's Kell Brook going to deal with that on the inside? That's a key question for me. Will Kell Brook be able to keep Errol Spence at range? There's other doubts about Kell Brook. How much will it take out of Kell to make 147 after his last fight was at 160? He looks like he's made the weight well, but we'll only really know when we see him in the ring and we see how it affects his performance. How will Kell Brook be coming back after that Golovkin loss? I know it was only over 4 or 5 rounds. He wasn't dropped, he wasn't knocked out, but he was badly injured and he took a lot of heavy punches from one of the biggest punchers in the sport that night. Will that have an effect on Kell Brook? That eye injury supposedly held up well in sparring, but is that something that Errol Spence will target? A lot of unknowns about Kell Brook. We haven't seen him since that Golovkin fight. We're having to trust and believe that he remains unaffected by that loss. Let's see if that is the case when he actually steps in the ring against Errol Spence. It's a big question, if you like. So it's a fascinating fight. Big strengths of both. Open question marks about both men, and that's what really makes this such an interesting battle. In terms of how the fight's going to play out, I suspect the early rounds will be quite tentative. Big night for both, biggest fight for both, huge crowd, huge occasion. I expect we'll see a lot of posturing behind the jab, a lot of chess, if you like, in the early rounds. I maybe give Kell Brook a slight advantage in terms of picking up those early rounds, and I think that's key because you've got to remember there's been a lot of questionable judging decisions in the UK, and if this goes 12 rounds and you've bet on Errol Spence, or if you're an Errol Spence fan, you've got to be nervous if this is a give or take fight because those UK judges probably won't be doing Errol Spence too many favours, let's put it that way. But I think after 2, 3, 4 rounds, the fight will start to warm up and Errol Spence will look to impose himself on the fight more and bring the heat on Kell Brook. And I think that's the key part of this fight. I think the key question is when Errol Spence tries to cut down that range and tries to bring the fight into a scrap, does Kell Brook allow him to do that? Can Kell keep him off? Can Kell catch him and hurt him on the way in? Or is Errol allowed to close down that gap? Will we see Kell Brook in a similar position we saw in that Golovkin fight? Will we see Brook with his back to the ropes, back to the corner of the ring, taking punches, and Errol Spence being able to unload 4 or 5 punch combinations, changing levels head body? For me, that's the key question. If we see Kell Brook's back touching the ropes and Errol Spence setting his feet and throwing those combinations, very unlikely Kell wins the fight. If we see Errol looking to close down the ring and cut down the space, and Kell's countering him with a right to the chin, stopping his progression and then wheeling out and circling out, for me, then it's a Kell Brook night. I think that's the key question of the fight, and I can't wait to find out what the answer is. Genuinely, I don't know. I've changed my opinion on this fight so many times. I'm going to make a prediction, but I don't have a strong instinct as to who's going to win. I think both men are very, very live. I am going to pick someone. If I get it right, I don't want a huge amount of credit for getting it right because I don't really know. I'm just picking a name based on gut instinct. I'm going to pick Errol Spence to win this fight. There's a lot of question marks about Kell Brook. How much will the cut down to 147 affect him? But I think one of the biggest questions is that has Kell Brook ever been a guy who really would live with a guy like Errol Spence on the inside? We've seen him in fights where he's had to frustrate and hold and grind down opponents at close range before, but I don't think any of those opponents have the education, and I don't think any of those opponents have the sort of force of nature attack that Errol Spence has. And I do just think that Errol Spence is the next big thing. You know, we've heard all the stories about him in the gyms and him giving Floyd Mayweather trouble and knocking out Adrian Broner and all of this stuff. I do just think Errol Spence is coming over here full of confidence. That confidence could be his downfall, but on the balance of probability, I think the pressure, the size, the athleticism and the power that Errol Spence is going to bring is going to make this a tough night for Kell Brook. I think Kell Brook is going to have his back touch the ropes, and I don't think he's going to be able to hold Errol Spence like he did against Sean Porter. And I don't think that when Spence is able to unleash his punches, Kell Brook is going to be able to fight him on the inside. I think Kell needs to keep the fight at range and use his distance. And I'm just not sure he's going to be able to do that. But it's a 50-50 fight. I hope I'm wrong, and I could very easily be wrong. This is not a confident prediction. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. Who are you picking and by what method? I'm probably picking Errol Spence to score a late stoppage here, mid to late stoppage. But no result surprises me. I think a Spence points win would possibly be the least likely. I think Brook winning on points or Brook winning by knockout also wouldn't surprise me. But I think most likely is that Errol Spence gets to Kell Brook, and after relentless pressure, relentless heat on the inside, Errol Spence finds a way to win. Let me know your thoughts, comments in the section below. Please hit the subscribe button so you can check out all my other stuff, including my post-fight coverage. If you've enjoyed this video, do take the time to hit the thumbs up button, which will help get it more visibility. Thanks for watching.